Hello and welcome to Tom Talks. Now today we're going to finish off our series on the 2022 Formula One regulations by looking at the rear end of the car. So this includes the diffuser and its two kicks that it has, some of the conditioning around the rear tyre, the rear wing, and actually the aerodynamics of the rear tyre itself. This is the final part and sort of completes the package of the whole car, so I'm looking forward to giving this a shot. Okay, so similar to last time, let's start with the regulation model. And here's what we've got. Now, we want to maximize our inlet. We talked about that last time. And this time we really want to maximize our outlet. So we really want to be using this whole top section of our regulation model. Not only is this basically greater expansion for our diffuser, provided that we manage any tyre squirt or losses coming into the region that is, but it also puts the diffuser in a closer proximity to the beam wing, and the beam wing is quite a powerful device. So we've got the beam wing, which you can see here, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but essentially we're putting the low pressure region of the beam wing directly on the top of the diffuser. And when we put it on the top of the diffuser, we can pump more mass flow through the entire system. Something to notice is our throat is largely fixed here, so we're only going to be able to change this via ride height conditions. I think that there's not much freedom in this particular area, probably because teams could play around with running their throat very, very aggressively to the ground, meaning that it'd be easy to stall out your floor and reduce a lot of drag on the straights, but this would come at stability issues on high-speed corners. So I suspect that's why there's such a little sort of area there. We've still got with our inlet here, I mentioned this a lot before, and we are focusing on the rear part of the car, so I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but we're feeding a lot of our losses into the floor here, which means you'd actually want that outboard fence perhaps inboard more. And so I think that this lines up to try and maximize your inlet and open up that outboard section. I think that it comes down to a lot of design methodology that the teams are going to be doing. So I doubt that Formula One teams will be just simulating legal designs. I've definitely found success in simulating designs which are totally illegal, but to create an effect and see what the magnitude of that effect is. So in this example, the first thing that I do is make a front wing which actually works. So put on a foot plate, maybe chuck in a strake or two, manage the squirt a bit better, and then see how much of an effect that really has on the floor stability and sensitivity in different conditions. So I think that's quite important. Now I'm going to quickly sweep through the whole car with total pressure now, so that we get an understanding of the flow field, and then we'll check out the rear of the car. So we roll up our two outboard vortices there, a lot of inwash, lots of squirt. The squirt's coming into the floor, which isn't ideal. Now here we've got a lot of our high energy air, which we talked about before, and our vortex roll up, which is giving us a lot of our loading. Laterally expand, we'd capture that with an edge wing. Now we begin to come in, and here's where the floor philosophy kind of changes. So before we were laterally expanding a bunch of air, now it's the opposite. We've got a big volume in here which we're going to want to fill. It's quite low pressure. We're around the kick in the diffuser, and air is going to want to come under here. Now the diffuser, I should mention, goes and it has kind of two kicks like that, obviously not to that extent, but the teams are definitely going to have some play with that curvature and this curvature to get the best possible combination for their package. And generally this sort of step to diffuse this concave convex is typically something that we see on a lot of these tunnel-like cars. So we're turning the floor to inwash, and what you'd really want to be doing in this region is popping a little tunnel here and create a vortex in there. And this is going to help to seal this part of the floor so we don't have too much inwash coming into the rear tyre, which is going to squirt the rear tyre even more. Use this structure to our advantage, maybe smash it into the tyre, or come inboard of the tyre and manage some of that squirt, which is going to give us a better outlet for our diffuser. So I think that this is another one of the sensitive areas around the car where there's potentially quite a bit of performance to be made, especially because this is quite far down the car. The further down the car you go, the more differences there are in the flow field compared to your competitors. At the very start, you've all got clean air, assuming no dirty air, that is. And then as you come down the car, things change more and more. So this is quite a sensitive area, I think. Another thing we've got here, our side pod is separated a bit. I'm not really going to be focusing on this too much. It should stay attached. This is obviously just a bit too aggressive or poor modelling. What you really want is to retain a high energy airflow here. Pull your side pod in, and then you've got this high energy air to pass over your beam wing. Alternatively, we might see teams have this side pod drawdown thing, where you actually take some air and downwash it onto the beam wing, but that's very much dependent on packaging and a lot of other factors. Now you do get a small section in here for vortex generators, a bit further back than this admittedly, but you get a small section there where you get to put a few vortex generators which will churn up the boundary layer, increase attachment through the central section. I didn't put any vortex generators in this model itself because I knew that the floor wasn't going to be very good or like very optimized, so it's already very lossy there. It's quite a thick boundary layer. There's no point really adding any more. Now let's continue. So you can begin to see the inwash coming in, so coming in there, and we get into the rear tire. So I'll make a quick note on the rear suspension here. The rear suspension will have a smaller influence, I think, than the front suspension, definitely. The rear suspension, you can begin to turn the airflow if you need to. It's in quite close proximity to the floor itself, so I'm not too sure, maybe a little bit of upwash there, but I think you're just going to be minimizing your losses from the suspension really, and trying to reduce the blockage from it so that you get the maximum flow onto your beam wing and the diffuser. You can begin to see all of this air coming over and in for our edge vortex in our diffuser. This is going to give you some support in that region, but generally this is the part of the car, and we're getting to it, where squirt's going to come out here, and we really want to manage that loss, which is going to build up quite massively. Now you've also got in this section, if I've got it here, you've got quite a lot of high energy air. Let's use that, and we actually get a little device that we can put in there. Another thing to note is our vortex just got quite lossy there. It got quite big. We've lost a bit of power, so I go back and I'll come back through. Yeah, this vortex, I was a bit too aggressive with it. We've lost some energy downstream. We prefer to keep this intact. This is causing losses throughout our diffuser, so very easy gains there if we adjusted our fence profile. Okay, so here's the device that I was talking about. Now this is going to help with your rear squirt management. And firstly, this device, I messed it up. I messed it up against the angle of attack of air hitting it. It's too steep an angle of attack too early on, so this device completely separates. So it's nowhere near as effective as it should be or could be. Other thing to note is this is just a single element device. It looks like you can have multiple elements, and so that'll increase its effect. So what does it do? Well, firstly, it does act like a wing, so you do generate a fair amount of downforce from it. But you've also got this end fence section which curls down, and that's gonna try to stop some of the squirt coming in. Now, I think that there's been quite a few revisions of this device in the rules. Again, it's a very sensitive area. It looks like it's not allowed to be as low to the ground, which is bad for performance. So that's definitely something the teams are going to have to manage. Now, the way that this upwash section can help your squirt is the squirt is very, very, very lossy, and you can kind of bully loss around a little bit because it's very lossy, it doesn't have much energy. So in this case you've got squirt. Now it wants to move into the diffuser because you've got such a low pressure region, so it wants to move into the diffuser. We don't want it to move into the diffuser. It can't move down because there's a ground in the way. It can't move out because there's a tyre in the way, and that's where all the air is coming from. So the best way is to try to kick it up. Now you can move it into the tyre and reduce the separation and the squirt off the tyre by pushing air onto the tyre, but it's very hard in this sort of situation when we don't have much control of structures in front of it. We don't have much freedom there. So in this case we're definitely going to be wanting to pull it up, and so the low pressure that this device generates is actually going to be sucking that loss up instead of into the diffuser itself. I'll flick here. So even though my device is stowed near the front of it, admittedly, so where there is quite high curvature relative to flow, we do generate quite a bit of low pressure off it, and that's really going to be trying to draw up some of this squirt. You can see the interaction, the suspension very close to the floor there. I've got no idea what the kinematics are going to be like on the car, so suspension goes roughly where I think it'll go, no idea, something that we can't really focus on. And here's that big vortex roll up in the actual diffuser itself. Now we'll keep going. So we get closer to the rear wing. In fact, we can see the curvature there that I've selected, and here is that separation on that device, which is 100% not ideal. You can fix that and gain quite a bit of performance, and you'll suck up more squirt, and it'll be a much more efficient device. In this kind of region, you've also got your introduction of cooling air coming back into the car, so that's definitely something to look out for. I've got no idea how lossy the cooling air is, so I didn't know how roughly to specify it in my CFD. But if you're a Formula 1 team and you'd like to give me all your data on cooling, I'd be more than happy to take it. Okay, now just behind the tyre here, we have these two vortex roll-ups on the tyre itself. When you're looking at the back of the car, what you want to do is make sure that you've used up all of the air possible. So we've got a lot of air here still to use, that's fine, we've got the rear wing that's going to do that. And we want to use absolutely everything, all of the air in this region. We also want to give it a nice outlet condition, so the squirt is coming in, and this is basically like a wall. So I did a front wing interactions video, and I made two front wings, one that was actually shorter, or the span was shorter than another front wing, and the front wing with the larger span actually blew up a vortex a lot more aggressively because it had a blockage in front of the tyre. Now in this case, your blockage isn't the tyre, your blockage is the loss that the tyre produces, and so this is going to hamper the actual performance of the diffuser. So managing this region is going to be quite critical to performance. One really big part of the car is what is happening in that region, and that is rear tyre. Now I can't compare much with this simulation because you need to correlate these and get your setup right. This is quite a computationally cheap case, or very computationally cheap case compared to what the teams will be doing, but even still it's quite a computationally cheap case. So and even if it was a good case, you still don't know exactly how accurate your separation is off your tyres, because firstly they're rotating, that adds a little bit of complexity. Secondly, surface roughness, and thirdly, this is the rear tyre, so to see accurate separation off your rear tyre, you need to have accurate flow around your tyre, which means every device in front of your car needs to be accurate. I already mentioned in the last video how I think my refinement regions were a bit too close to the car, which is why a lower front tyre wake is way out there. The reason why the rear tyre is a bit different this year is because, well, at least in this model, we had the full flow conditioner over the top of the front tyre. Now, this does seem like it's been shortened up in the latest regulation, so it's shorter. This is going to mean that there is more of a top wake hanging around in the air. And while on premise this does seem like a bad thing, in some ways it's a good thing, I think, for the rear tyre. Because the rear tyre with this model saw a bunch of clean air passing directly on the top of it. This wasn't desirable because the airflow remains attached for quite a long time, and the tyre can generate quite a massive pressure drag on it. And the rear tyre itself is well in comparison to the rear wing in terms of drag levels. So I think that the rear tyre is a big work area for the teams, especially considering, so you've got the rear wing and the rear tyre, which are very draggy devices. If you take the aerodynamic efficiency of both of those devices, or the absolute value, because they're in different magnitudes, the rear tyre makes lift, the rear wing makes downforce, obviously. The rear wing has a much bigger effect on balance, obviously, than the tyre. Now, this means that if you're gonna try to play games and stall out or remain attached for longer one of those devices, you're gonna play around with the rear wheel. If you can do anything to try separate air at a better point along the tyre to reduce drag on straights, you're gonna do it. It's just, there's not many devices in front for you to work something like this. This is getting into quite complex interactions. You do have the tip vortex, which is shed from the rear wing, and this is going to change massively with what your rear ride height is. So maybe on a straight, if you pull that vortex down, maybe you have a different sort of interaction with the top of the tyre, shed some drag there, but this is getting quite up there. But I think that there is some performance there if somehow you can find a way to do it. Okay. Now, here's behind the car, just off the center line a bit, so I think 100 mil off center line. And this is the air that we're feeding our beam wing. So this beam wing here is actually allowed to be whoa, that's pretty bad. That one is a lot better. You're allowed to have 2 sections. The teams are going to have 2 sections there. You're trying to maximize that upwash out of the diffuser and pump it as much as you can. You're going to have 2 sections there. And again, this effect is really quite powerful. It'd be cool to do a simulation with and without a beam wing. I'd be surprised if the teams weren't going to the maximum outlet in their diffuser. I think it's going to be quite easy to do that, to be honest. If I flick to pressure here, so you can just have a bit of a look. The rear wing itself, here's my roughly inboard profile selection. So it curves up quite a lot, which means it relies a lot on some downwash coming into it, which is typically what we do. And then what I did in this model is I actually tapered off the edge of the rear wing, made it the spoon type rear wing, which I'll explain a bit more later. One more slice here. So this is around the side pod. Now again, I was talking about using any airflow which you've got. We've got this beautiful high stream air that's just passing straight through the car. This is not desirable. You'd want to use this. Something I didn't model in is brake ducts. I don't know much about the ducting on the cars. So this will take away some air at the front for the front brakes, but also the rear brakes here. I think that you're going to be using this mass flow and cooling the rear brakes, having a duct right in that passage there. And finally, we'll finish on the rear wing shape, which has attracted a lot of attention because of its endplateless design, or rather the end plate just doesn't extend upwards like this, which firstly for aerodynamic efficiency is bad. We would want end plates if we could, and we'd louver them as well to help out with rear end yaw stability and potentially some drag reduction as well. So I chose this rear wing shape, so it curves up at the end. We have the spoon like rear wing, and what this is doing is decreasing the high pressure on this outboard section, which means the vortex is going to be of a smaller magnitude, greater efficiency. So it's quite a conservative package. I'm not trying to go for peak numbers here. I think that on a lot of the high-speed circuits you'll see something very much like this. There's no point ramming up the outboard section, I think, and having a really small inboard section unless you're doing really tricky stuff with the tyre. I think that this is very much what we're going to see. Something to notice though is that the flap has to be a shorter chord length than the main plane, which is pretty sure what we've always had in the regulations. But especially with this device, because we don't have end plates, the secondary element, or the flap on the rear wing, produces less drag than before. Why is this important? How you manage DRS. So the DRS should be quite a bit less powerful. I don't know how much they adjust the straights for this, or if it's still within 1 second, or maybe they make it 1.2 or whatever, make DRS more powerful to counteract. I assume it's going to be very similar, although they've got crazy mathematical models to work out how many overtakes a race per where they put the DRS zone. The teams are going to be factoring this into account for sure. You have to consider the flap, and especially on a track that's dominated a lot by a long straight, or a part of the track that's dominated by a long straight like Kemmel Straight, Spa, Monza. DRS is a huge advantage in qualifying, and so potentially compromising rear wing to some extent so that you gain more of an advantage from DRS is something that you could definitely do. Now, from side view, the rear wing end plate can actually, so you've got your rear wing and your elements there, so there'll be an element there. You can actually extend your end plate out like that, I think. I think that teams will do this. It'll stop from if you look from top view and your end plate was that long, a lot of air is going to want to come in and reduce some efficiency. I think that you'd want to continue it a bit longer so it's a bit harder. Yeah, I think that we're definitely going to see some extensions on the rear wing end plate and a small cutout. Every team's cutout will be slightly different, although all chasing the same goal. Small gains there, I think. The beam wing here is quite badly modelled for me. It's just a first iteration, so it is what it is. You've got your tailpipe here, which is spitting out air, which I should add, you can't angle this up, which is what you do, because the air that comes out of your exhaust tailpipe is affecting the upwash from your diffuser. It's trying to push it back down, so that's not ideal. Now you have to be 10 millimeters away with your beam wing, so what we'll see is definitely 2 sections in the beam wing and sculpting exactly 10 millimeters around that device there, I'm fairly sure. Another thing to note here is I left out mounting on the rear wing. I just completely forgot about it, to be honest. There's a little bit of freedom here, so you can either have a swan neck design going over the top, or you can have a bottom mount design. You can have 1 or 2 supports, but you're restricted to, I think, 25 millimeters in width. Needs to be symmetrical. What else is there? And a maximum cross-sectional area of 5,000 millimeters or something. And that's it. So we will see slightly different designs. I've got no idea if it's going to be top mounted or bottom mounted. I can tell you the differences, but this is really more of a structural challenge as well, and a compromise over there. We'll probably see some sort of swan neck design. Another thing to note is the regulations there were quite free, at least in issue 2. So provided that your structural guys can produce something that's well less than 25 millimeters and well less than 5,000 millimeters squared of area in the section in front of your rear wing leading edge, then there's no reason why you can't sculpt your actual mount to perhaps influence some airflow a bit. So we're dealing with this massive downwash into the leading edge of the rear wing center section, which is this sort of concept, which is maximum downforce in the center, trail off towards the tips. So you could potentially sculpt your mounting a bit, so it's kind of like a ridge for like a leading edge slat, or to potentially get rid of some separation off your rear wing leading edge. Maybe you could do that. Maybe if you dropped your rear end so much, you've effectively tipped back your rear wing so much that you can separate the leading edge of your main plane and reduce some drag, because after you separate the leading edge of your rear wing main plane in the center, that's game over. But otherwise they'd be doing that right now. Yeah, no, you wouldn't be able to get enough ride height. Sorry, me just rambling on. I'm thinking of stuff. So you could play with your swan necks a little bit to have some sort of aerodynamic influence based on these rules. Now, quick mention on balance on the car. I came out with 55% rear, which is probably still a bit too far forward, but these cars I think are very rear end limited, drag or downforce, so it's definitely going to be quite a conservative in terms of downforce, producing front wing section and a much more rear end heavy on downforce car. I'll quickly finish with the rear wing itself. So normal to the rear wing, outside of this central section that is, you can only be 25 degrees to the vertical, and this is just to stop people going up like that and creating an artificial end plate itself, I think, so or any excessive curvature. A similar rule follows for the actual beam wing here, because to push some of this upper weight outboard and give yourself a better exit, you could potentially curve that up a bit and kick some air outboard. Even though it would be detrimental to here, you might get a better effect because you're pushing the weight outboard. So they're just some of the interactions on the rear end of the car. A quick comment on the model. This model I made in not a long time, probably I think it was 2 nights or so, and so it's definitely not perfect. I describe it as a one-off model. I didn't parameterize as many things as I normally would, so it's not a model which you develop very well, but nevertheless, for what I was going for some cheap simulations, just to get a rough idea of airflow, I think it was a decent model, and it did the job certainly for me. But yeah, this is definitely not a model that I'd be working on. Alright, so thank you for watching this video and perhaps this series. I hope you enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed it. I think the new rules are interesting. I'm keen to see what the teams come up with, but if I'm going to have a guess, the rules are definitely very restrictive. I think we're going to see minor details associated with curvatures and very small sections of the car, probably underneath the car, that's going to make some performance difference. So it's definitely different to what we're used to, but nevertheless, who knows, there might be a loophole somewhere, and if that gets exposed, it could get quite interesting. So thank you very much for watching. If there's something that I missed, or something that you think I should have done differently, or you've seen some other things that I should perhaps look at, definitely let me know. I'd be very interested. I'll see you in the next video.